What's up, gentlemen? This is Rising Phoenix Podcast, a podcast about how to rise up after your divorce. I'm your host, divorce coach, Michael Rhodes. Let's get into it. Joining me today is Noam Raucher. Noam, why don't you jump right into it and tell us a little bit about yourself?
I appreciate that. Thank you very much. I think I'm a nice guy. If I could just start off with that, like a pretty decent human being. If I could just throw that in there before we get into the career stuff. But yeah, I think I'm a good person. You know, I pay my taxes on time. I take out my recycling. I help my neighbors when I can, and sometimes when I can't. I'm an educator and a rabbi, and I do a lot of coaching as well. I do spiritual and I do divorce coaching, spiritual coaching for anyone who's really seeking it, anyone who's facing a challenge or a deep quandary in their life. They're at a crossroads and they need to approach it with some type of perspective or wisdom. They need to draw on their own internal strength to move forward through those moments, whatever they might be: career change, loss of a loved one, a loss of love in general, loss in general as well. And any number of different other life scenarios. They could be celebratory as well, becoming a new parent, right? Getting a new job, right? Offering into wandering into a new scenario entirely. And then a divorce coach for men, particularly for men who are moving through it with a sense of confusion and want to have clarity and perspective and wisdom and draw on, again, all their own inner strength. There's a lot of overlap between the two, particularly going through this moment with confidence and dignity. So I help them find their strength and their perspective and their clarity in those moments, and particularly in divorce, so they can get what they want out of it, and also have peace. There's a lot of really fulfilling work that I'm doing lately on top of teaching, which feels wonderful. So I'm enjoying myself.
I want to go back to something. This might cause a rabbit hole. I try to avoid saying that phrase or word because I say it too much, I think. But it happens. It's reality. So here we are.
Let's do it.
You said, I think I'm a pretty good guy.
Yeah.
Yet,
start off with that.
Despite all that, you still wound up divorced. Isn't there some kind of a mind fuck there in the beginning when you're going through this? Because you think, well, geez, I'm not that bad, am I? Don't you go through that sort of questioning if you're a good person or not? At least I know I did. And the answer initially was no. I'm a shitty person. I'm a bad person.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you're taking the transition seriously as you should, you have to ask yourself what you contributed to it, right? Rarely does life happen to us, and maybe it does to a lot of us. The life just happens to us, and maybe divorce just kind of happens to us. But you still have to ask, what led to the circumstances by which that could be, right? Why would divorce be something that's in your life now? Why did your ex ask for it? And yeah, there could have been certain things that you did. Maybe you didn't temper your anger, didn't manage your depression, or you drank or smoked too much, or you didn't listen to what she said, or you stepped out on the marriage, or you lied, or you did any number of different things that could have been really problematic. And you didn't heed any warnings or anything like that. I don't know that necessarily makes you a bad person. I think that makes you human.
For sure.
I think there is a easily visible line that we've created between things that are criminal and immoral, and crossing those, then I think does bring your character into question. But for the most part, I think, we're complex people and we do hurt each other. There's no question about that. I'm not going to deny that or dismiss that. There's hurt and there's pain deliberately being inflicted from one side to the next. Sometimes it is physical and abusive and criminal, and that needs to be dealt with in a particular way. Sure. Sometimes it's just emotional, and not even stemming into the area of emotional abuse, right? Or financial abuse, but simply just because we're human beings and we hurt each other. Yeah. And that's an unfortunate element of life. And hopefully we can own that. I mean, I think that's what makes the difference between really being an asshole or being a shithead or being a jerk, and not. Whether or not you can admit that you did those things and take responsibility for it, and then learn and grow from it. And to say, at that time, I was thinking or feeling X, Y, and Z, which is why I acted in this way. And now at this time, I am not that person. And I am more aware of when I become like that person and how I can handle it and channel it in better ways so that it doesn't inflict pain upon other people. There's a great expression I learned in this whole divorce journey of hurt people hurt people.
Mm,
It's true. So I
yeah.
wonder what type of pain was I in at that time when I did that. Not that that justifies what I did, but hopefully that I can understand myself and
Yeah.
hopefully I can explain myself a little bit better.
Yeah, I always feel like it takes pressure off of yourself because we're so good at putting pressure on ourselves and for blaming ourselves and for because it's sort of our natural default setting. But if you can take a step back and say, well, I didn't know better, so I knew what I worked with the tools I had. It wasn't necessarily that I was a bad person. I just didn't know any better. I didn't have the skills. I didn't realize I didn't have the introspection or I just didn't know any better. Did you find yourself blaming yourself in the beginning? Were you very hard on yourself? Like I think most of us that go
Sure.
through
Yeah.
this in the
Yeah.
beginning too. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I went through moments of feeling like a real zero. I went through moments of not really wanting to be Noam anymore, of being like, this is really ugly, and I don't like talking about this, and I don't like
Mm.
being part of the story, and wanted to escape all of that. No question about it. Um, but I think, and also doing the work of taking accountability, right? And that deep introspective work of asking yourself what you do need to take accountability for. You also realize what's not yours to take accountability for and what's still there nonetheless. And so the two-way street becomes clearer and clearer. And so, sure, you may have contributed certain things that didn't work,
Yeah.
right? And you have to bear the responsibility and the consequences of that scenario now. But at the same time, you don't bear that alone because you know that someone else is going through it with you.
Mm.
And again, there are always exceptions to that. That's a pretty heteronormative way of looking at divorce.
Right. Yeah.
But so that's my story nonetheless. And if we're talking about do we see ourselves as assholes, I used to. I did. I don't anymore.
Yeah. Were you all the things that you listed? Obviously, divorce coach didn't come until divorce, or
Yeah.
coach probably in general. But the spiritual aspect, the rabbi stuff. Were you a rabbi before divorce? Is this something you found after? I'm just curious. Like, was spirituality a part of your life pre-divorce?
Yes, it was. So I'm a little bit of a hired gun in that way. But yeah, I've been a rabbi since 2011 officially. They say you become a rabbi when you go into rabbinical school, but I know I officially became it in 2011.
Mm.
Yeah, and it's been something that's informed, my path, not only professionally but also personally as well, and I think aided me in the process of going through a divorce because I could see kind of like how I was going through any number of different stages and how I was grieving it and what I needed to do and as a way of solemnizing the whole event, right, of making it sacred and giving it meaning so that it wasn't just something that happened to me, but that also brought me wisdom and perspective and also a better sense of who I was and maybe even a new identity in the process because I think that's what spirituality is. It's how connected are you and aware of this connection to the larger world around you and how does it impact you in that way and how does the larger world around you become part of you and how do you become part of the larger world through that connection.
Yeah.
And so for me, it was a real kind of saving grace. It's what built bridges for me to reach out and find other communities to be a part of, to reach out and seek help. And I think to uh, come out more whole in the end of divorce than I think most people do. I certainly didn't want to be bitter in the end, and I don't think I'm bitter. I wrestle with things from time to time, but again, I'm human, but I'm not bitter, which is good, which feels really good. And I feel like my spirit's been emboldened from the whole process as a result as well. And I think those are some of the best things that you can ask for in the process. And I think it's primarily because of my spiritual practices and feelings of spiritual connection. Yeah.
Yeah, so you kind of did define it, but I always like to define things. So let's focus on it and perhaps hone in on what is spirituality to you.
Anything that connects you to the world around you and something greater than yourself.
And did that so there's a lot around there. So I'm probably not as in touch with that side of myself as I'd like to be, and it's one of these years. So I'll focus on it in some kind of way, but
Well, but wait a second. You've got a wonderful title for your podcast, The Rising Phoenix. That's a beautiful idea and image. And I would suggest to say a spiritual one as well, right? In the sense that you understand the idea of rebirth, right?
true.
Of being born again after crashing in some way. And if anything, being reborn in a more beautiful, more powerful way. That I would suggest is a very spiritual concept. The question by which people actually, engage in that metaphor in their own lives, so much so that it does become a tool of empowerment, is another thing altogether. But to have a connection with it and to see it as something that brings you inspiration and a reminder about what is possible is a beautiful thing. It really is.
Yeah. Well, it's definitely, I mean, I chose it for a reason, for sure. I don't know that I looked at it in a larger sort of connected to something else kind of way. But I guess for me, I probably just struggle with the definition of spirituality and connecting with something greater than me, just because I didn't have religion in my life. And I know that spirituality isn't necessarily religion. And I definitely understand all that. It's just,
Yeah.
I don't think I've ever personally honed in on it, but in terms of like asking some of these bigger questions, I always feel like I'm sort of agnostic in some ways, where it's like, I don't know, like, if Jesus or Muhammad or whoever, Buddha,
Right.
knocked on my door and said, "Hey bro, could you help me out with this?" I'd be
Right.
like, "Well, Jesus, yeah, of course. Yeah, I hear you're a great
I'm there,
guy.
bro. Right.
Yeah, how can I help?" But that obviously that's not going to happen. And I struggle with faith, just having the belief that something's there without him knocking on my door. But so for you, did you, if you believe in sort of a higher power type thing, who sort of nurtures and oversees, maybe nurtures is the wrong word, but I guess what I'm sort of wondering is, did you have questions about your spirituality because you're going through a divorce? Like, I would think there would have been a part of me that would have been like, well, F you, God, like, where are you now? Like, why are you putting me through this? Which I understand that there's nuance to that in terms of like, well, that's not how it works and all that kind of thing. But for
Yeah.
you personally, did you struggle with things because of your divorce?
So I think the most dramatic I got about my divorce is that it was a death.
Mm.
Because it's a loss. I mean, you do
Yeah.
lose the family unit that you were creating and any dreams you had of that family unit moving somewhere together. Absolutely. I think it's a death. And that was the most dramatic I got about it. I really questioned my spirituality more so when I experienced the death of a close friend
Mm.
when I was just turning 28. It was very difficult. And actually, his memorial has come up, his memorial dates. And
Mm.
so we're going to be honoring that. But that was more of a circumstance where I ended up questioning my faith significantly and my relationship with God. Through divorce, I don't know that I turned to God so much. And I don't know that I blamed God as much as I did when my friend died.
Mm.
And I certainly didn't walk away from God or anything like that, because I think in the grander perspective of things that, like, yes, divorce is very difficult and it is like a death, but it's not like the actual death
Yeah.
of a loved one. And so and that is not to dismiss the significance of divorce for anyone, but I think for me the proper perspective is respecting life first, and then
Mm.
comes marriage. um
Mm.
and so what I certainly did was become upset that my community didn't really rally around me in the way that I expected and that I wanted,
Yeah.
especially after reaching out about it,
Yeah.
and letting them know formally and letting them know how I was.
Yeah.
And to know that my community also didn't really have a lot of formal tools, rituals per se, to handle these things. Like I needed to I'm blessed in knowing how to navigate through my own spiritual practices and that of my faith. And so I could adapt the rituals as I needed to really fit the moments that I was going through, so that I could process these experiences with meaning and find the wisdom involved in them. But I had to do that on my own.
Yeah.
And that was primarily upsetting about it too. And so the distance I had from faith, whether you want to say it was from God or from community or both, much more had to do with just how do I process this whole experience, and less so to do kind of like with the ultimate shock of the event, like with the death of a friend.
Yeah. Did you, because you're now in a, as my friend Chris says, divorce is a dirty word in the American church.
Sure.
Did you, now that I mean, I don't know at the time, but certainly now you're in a position sort of leadership, right? Do you find yourself making a point to handle it differently than it was for you by those that you sort of had expectations on? Do you think that shaped how you view it now and how you handle it?
You're talking about if I was in the position and someone else came to me,
Yeah.
right, and they
Yeah.
were going through, yeah, absolutely. There's no question about it. I mean, and I think that's part of what I'm offering the community is to say that if you are going through experience, you don't have to go through it alone.
Yeah.
Uh, we just came back from a retreat that was the first Jewish divorce retreat. And so
Wow.
one thing that was clear was just that there was a lot of people who wanted to share and be heard and be seen,
Yeah.
and affirmed for what they were feeling. I mean, literally, we were having small break-off groups, and people were reporting that in these small little break-off support groups that were all part of the retreat, that as soon as we would open the floor about like how you doing or something like that, people would break down and say it's things like, I'm so glad I'm finally here and I can share this,
Yeah.
because they had been keeping it bottled up for so long. And so I think the lack of having vessels by which people can gather and ritualize what's been going on and honor it in that way also creates, unfortunately, a reservoir within people of things that they want to share, and it just builds up and it builds up, and people need space. And I think at the very least, what I'm creating is space for people to share those experiences and be seen and be heard, so that it does provide them with greater meaning and perspective.
Yeah. So then would you say that your spirituality evolved during this process? Doesn't sound like it waned. Did it strengthen? How did it, and I guess the ultimate
Yeah.
question is, how did it guide you through this?
Yeah. Well, I think, the two things that my spirituality helped me realize was that I had wells full of resilience and grit. Two traits that I didn't know I even had in particular,
Hmm.
but that the ability to bounce back from something, right? Not only to, experience and go through it and then come out the other side, but then also turn it into something that's been really beneficial for me in certain ways. Just in terms of the opportunity to write a new chapter, and having this new door to walk through. And what else do I want to bring into my life in that way, and taking advantage of it, thinking about myself as a parent and challenging myself as a parent, and also needing to restart my career in that way.
Yeah.
And seeing that I had the opportunity really to bear down for extensive periods of time and really put my shoulder into it, to trust myself and to see the worth that came from all that, was really a beautiful transformation to have gone through in the process. So I'm grateful for that, because had I not known that, I would never have felt this way about myself as I do now, which is very different, as compared to going into the divorce and even going into the pandemic.
As you went through this process, you leaned into it, I guess. Do you think that, in a weird way, and I always struggle with this thought, that you're grateful for what occurred?
I mean, I think given the right amount of time and perspective, you do, and where you are, um, gratitude is a natural disposition to find yourself in. It really is, because inevitably, if you're where you are and you had gone through that experience, you're stronger for it in some way, because you're not dead,
Hmm.
and you're very much, even if you were injured, you got past it.
Right.
And the body naturally heals in stronger ways when it does get injured. I mean, exercising is inherently injuring ourselves. We tear the
Yep.
muscles, so they come back bigger and stronger. And if all those, and those are, I think, again, if you're looking back on these moments, you potentially, that's from a perspective of privilege to have done that, to have survived that moment, gone through relatively intact, and even stronger and wiser as a process. Again, if you're a spiritual person, a spiritual individual, then I do think, yeah, gratitude is a natural place to be at that point, because you have to say thank you for what it gave you,
Man,
even if that means thanking the difficult people involved.
yeah, that's such a tough, for me, that's and I think I'm getting there, and I think it's a constant sort of battle, but it's a tough, it almost feels invalidating a little bit to say, in a way, like, boy, I'm really glad that happens. And so in that, or this happened. And also in some ways you're also saying, I'm really glad she did that. But boy, is that tough to square, because it's like all this shit that I went through, and the money that I've lost, and the time with my
Yeah.
children, and all
Yeah.
these things. It's so hard to sometimes, for me, go, boy, I'm glad this happened. But there has been so many positives.
Yeah.
But I feel like sometimes to me, it feels invalidating to say, like, so glad this happened.
Yeah.
It almost, like, I don't know, maybe I feel like it's giving her a pass or something, which I'm slowly but surely getting to the point where that doesn't fucking matter to me anymore. Whatever happened. But there is a struggle
Well,
there where it's like you're in a way being grateful is thanking her, and I don't want to thank her for any fucking thing. You know what I mean?
I can respect that, and nobody says you have to be happy about it. It's not a
Sure.
matter of that. It's a matter of being grateful. Look, life hands you things from time to time.
Very
You don't
true.
have control over it, and to a large extent, what makes you a mature individual, how you handle those challenges.
Yeah.
And again, nobody says you have to be happy about it, right?
Right.
Nobody says you have to be angry about it either,
True.
right? And you could also think of forgiveness as a tool to letting go of anger, which is just to
Yeah.
say, right, the longer you stay angry about this thing that life has presented you, and again, it's not fair, it's not good,
Yeah.
right? For the most part, it may not be good, right? You may not have
Yeah.
liked it. It might have brought you a lot of pain and shittiness, and
Yep.
who knows, on the flip side of all the good stuff it's brought. But at the same time, right, that's anger inducing things. But why let her live rent free in your head,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? By
Yeah.
still being angry about it. Why not just kind of forgive her and move on and say, fuck, I'm going to do the best I can with what I've
Yeah.
been given, right? And I'm not going to let it get me down. It certainly
Yeah.
seems like that's happening with your podcast. It happens with my podcast,
Sure.
right? You know, I think those are the best things, some of the best things that you could ask for in a circumstance like this. And again, maybe it's the anger that fuels you, right? As a way of saying,
Mm.
I'm not going to let this circumstance get
Yeah.
me down, right? But rather than let it control you.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, that's where you want to get to. It's just sometimes
Yeah.
looking back, or reflecting, sometimes it's, again, it feels invalidating. And but at the end of the day, I like that phrase. Middle of the day, whatever, at some point in the day.
But why is it invalidating? I mean, look, again, in that moment, sure, nobody's saying you have to be thankful for it,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Well,
Honor the feeling about it. It fucking sucks. There's no
yeah,
question about it,
yeah, it
right?
does.
And it can continue to fucking suck, but that also doesn't mean that you can't feel at another point, right? That, like, yeah, it fucking sucks, but I'm also grateful for it. I
Yeah.
feel that
Well,
way about going to the gym sometimes. There are times I'm in the middle of it, right, in CrossFit, and I'm like, this fucking sucks. I fucking hate this
yeah.
instructor. Why is he doing this to me? Why is she doing this to me?
Right.
This is not what I signed up for, right? I wanted it to be tough. I didn't want it to be this. And then you
Yeah.
come out and you're like, and you might feel really better about yourself,
Sure.
good about yourself, and you're like, all right, I appreciate that.
Yeah. It's all. I think it's perspective. I think is what it boils down to. Like, you can have the perspective that it fucking sucks, but, and that's the perspective part, where it's like, okay, make the best, move forward, don't stay stuck, all these things. It's more about having the perspective of what now, and how to be better now, or whatever, or how to use it, or whatever, versus just saying, boy, this fucking sucks, all these things, all this money, the
Yeah,
lawyers, and not
yeah,
seeing my kids, and
yeah.
those things. I think that obviously they still exist, that they're, and it's true that they did suck, and it wasn't right, perhaps, although who knows, who can say that. That's also a difficult question, I think. right, wrong, whose choice? Did she make a valid one? Was it
Right.
the things I did, were they really worthy of that, all this shit? But whatever. You can stay stuck there. You certainly can,
Yeah.
and people do, and men do.
Yeah.
I think people, but maybe men a little bit more. I don't know, but then it's what now? I think is the ultimate question. But there's certain moments sometimes where it's like, well, almost I almost feel like a child, like, like I don't want to do this shit, right? Like you were saying, like with the instructor, like, this sucks, I don't want to do it, but you do it anyway, because what choice do you have if you want to have a better life, a good life?
That's part of being an adult as well. I mean, if you're
Yeah,
a kid,
yeah,
unfortunately, as a kid, fortunately, you have the opportunity to sit there and whine about it, and someone else will take care of
right.
what's going on around you. But you don't as an adult,
No,
and
you
you
don't.
can't have a moment by which you do whine about it and get pissed off. Look, I know plenty of people who go to rage rooms. You know what rage rooms are?
Yeah,
These are
yeah,
the
yep,
best thing, right? You can just
yes,
go and smash shit. You give them money to smash shit, and if
yeah,
you give them enough money, they'll let you smash a car. Like, you can have those moments. You can do those things even as an adult, right? But to an extent, you have to schedule them out because you got this whole other life that you need to take care of, and potentially you have other kids to take care of, real kids, right? Who
yeah,
are having their own real meltdowns about their own real shit in their own
yeah,
lives. And
yeah,
you're, as the parent, you need to navigate all that. And so nobody's saying that you can't have that. And in order to, I would say, avoid the invalidation, right? Say it doesn't matter if you validate it or
yeah,
not. This is the
yeah,
experience that I'm having.
yeah,
I'm gonna have it. Let me have it, and then move on and do some other things. Because again, the maturity in adulthood comes from being able to experience the things that are happening to us. And I would argue a matured adult is inherently a spiritually connected adult, but to experience what's going on around us, because the world has just brought us these things, staying connected to it, right? But not letting it overpower us, right? Taking it in, right? Letting it impact us, but then using it in really useful ways and not being overwhelmed by it, but by turning it into something else that could potentially be really useful.
yeah. No, so I no, I 100% agree. I mean, you honestly, you don't have a choice, especially with if you have children. There is no other choice. I mean, of course, you can do whatever the fuck you want, but if you wanted, I don't know, if do it the right way is the best phrasing. But if you want to have any kind of a life, then you don't have a choice. Like, you have to move forward, handle your shit. You said something, and by the way, I think that's what being a man is. It's about
Yeah.
owning your shit,
Yeah.
and it's yours. Own it, figure it out, and move forward. You
Yeah.
said something that I scribbled down. If I want to see if I got this right, a spiritually connected person is a mature person.
Yeah.
Did I get that right?
Yeah.
Can you dive into that a little bit? Because what does that mean to you? And how do you get to that if you're not
There's
there?
a great piece from the Talmud where it talks about looking at pretty normal things through the perspective of humanity and through the perspective of God. So you look at a full glass, right?
Hmm.
And a full glass of water, and a human being says there's no way you could put any more into that,
Right.
right? Because it's full, it's going to
Right.
overflow.
Yep.
And God takes a look at it and God says, no, you can put more into that,
Yeah.
right? That it's possible. And the whole idea is, attunement, right? And whether or not you're capable of seeing the beauty in the world.
Hmm.
So if you're capable of seeing the beauty in the world and you've seen it plenty, right? So much so that you're full of it, right? That doesn't mean you're incapable of taking more in. On the contrary, it means that you're capable of seeing more of it around us because you're so well attuned to it in that way, right? Um, Good candy for that matter,
Hmm.
right? Doesn't matter the size of the candy bar. What matters is the quality of each bite, right? And to the extent of which you can value the quality of each bite, you'll be able to value it that much more, right? When you do see it around in other places of other things,
Hmm.
right? And it's got nothing to do with the size of it, but more so to do with the quality of it, right? How really you appreciate the depth of the experience in the moment so that you can experience it in any number. It's like building a muscle, building a practice in that way.
I try to sort of, as I think I've said this a million times. I probably repeat myself so very fucking much.
It happens.
I always think about these things in my context, right? and I don't consider myself a spiritual person, and I wish I was a little bit more, but I don't even know what that means. So let's hone in on that. Let's say you're me, and you go, I'm not spiritual at all. How do I get to be that? And how would you, because you coach men through that, and you
Yeah.
sort of you lean on that. And I don't mean that in a negative way. I mean that's just what you know as part of your focus. What would you say to me as someone coming to you and saying, hey, I want to be more spiritual? How do I do that?
Yeah. I would start with a beautiful story. And I heard it told by David Foster Wallace, who's an author that's since passed on. He was a great
Yeah,
American author. He told
I love him.
he told this uh, story at a graduation ceremony where he was giving a speech. And he says there are two young fish that are swimming along in the ocean, just going about their business, swimming, in the ocean during the day. To which at some point they come across an older fish, right, who just meets them at some point and says, "Hey boys, how's the water?"
Yeah.
To the two young fish look at each other and they nod at the old fish, and then they swim on, right? And he says, "Have a good day." And they swim on for a little bit longer, and then all of a sudden the two young fish look at each other and they go, "What the hell is water?"
Yeah, I
Right?
love that whole speech. Yeah, yep.
And so I think the first step is, really trying to be aware of the things around us that are right in front of us that we often miss, right? And thinking so selfishly sometimes, right? Or thinking so forwardly at times, right? Too far in the future about what's going to happen rather than being in the present moment, right? We forget about the rest of the world around us, the people that are right in front of us who maybe need us, right? Or trying to communicate something to us or be there for us, and we might miss them entirely, right? Who are these people and what do we really need to be paying attention to that we're often missing because we're too caught up in ourselves and we're too worried about the future. And so that's where I would end up starting with someone who's with that story. And I'd be asking, like, what do you think you're missing?
Do you think that God works through people? And I know that seems like an obvious question, but I'm just thinking about this moment and interaction right now.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's causing me to go, let me think about some things, and is it possible that did God lead us to this moment? I know that sounds, I don't know how it sounds, maybe strange, but like this is water, right? Here we are.
Like leading me and you to this moment.
Yeah.
So here's what I think. You can call it God as maybe just the easiest 3-letter way of,
Right.
people attaching to this idea, but I'm going to broaden it to being, something more akin to the Force, maybe like even in Star Wars of this, greatest, positive energy running through the universe that encourages us and invites us into communion with the universe. And I think also to make the world a better place, right? It invites us in with every single choice that we have, right? That invitation exists.
Here's why I asked, because I know now, based on some of your words and some of your wisdom that you're imparting to me, that when we're done here and we wrap up, I'm gonna look at the sky differently. I'm gonna look at the tree in my yard differently. You know what I'm saying? And like I feel like that is a part of being spiritual based on what you're saying. I know that my actions when we are done with this interview are going to be different than when we started. And if that's the case, perhaps there was someone saying, let's make Michael look at things a little differently today. Obviously a lot of shit led to this, right? A lot, but here we are.
I would be touched if that were certainly the case, and I would certainly want that to be the impact I have on everyone I speak to, that they see the world a little differently.
I can promise
so
you,
whatever it is, whatever you want to call it, God or this force running through us, there's an opportunity that we're given at every moment as to whether or not we want to connect with that force, right? Mm-hmm. That opportunity, right? That I think a lot of people have in front of them as to whether or not they want to, be fully present in that moment, how they want to move forward, and what do they want to learn from that moment, and what will they do at the next subsequent moment based on what they learned from that previous one. And so we're always kind of building on those things by virtue of being connected to this larger force that's around us, right? Those who practice, I think, spirituality, those who want to be connected to that and other human beings, right? And they realize that like that means being in tune with the world and being able to be connected to people and being in conversation with them and also trying to understand them emotionally, and really trying to be there for them. And so, hopefully what I would encourage through this conversation is to say that, like, you don't have to take every moment for granted, that you can go outside, right, and see that there's a tree there, and appreciate the moment for the fact that there's an actual tree there. And I'm not saying going up to and hugging it, but if you wanted to, go up to and hug it, right? But also just appreciate the fact that, like, there's a greater world around you that exists, that grows trees, and those trees are part of a larger ecosystem, which do help clean the air and beautify the world, which you now get to enjoy and breathe clean air in, right? And seeing yourself as being part of all that as opposed to outside of all that, I think, is a key inherent step to recognizing the water that's around us, right? And not going on oblivious, and being, spiritually connected to a larger experience, a larger force that is running through the universe. And that starts with being aware and seeing how other things are connected to one another.
I always feel like it's organized religion's fault that there are people like me that feel the dogma of religion keeps me away from the beauty of the force, as we can call it. It feels like it's under lock and key, and I have to adhere to that dogma. And I'm not saying which religion or all religions. I'm just saying it feels to me personally like there's this such dogma around, you have to be a certain way, and you got to do this thing, and you got to do that thing, and it's honestly, it's fucking judgment from humans, not from religion.
Well,
but
and the funny part about it is that this whole point you're bringing up about individuality and does God work through individuals and things like that is exactly what organized religions don't want you to know, is that there's a lot of different ways of doing good, right? And you can do that. And so, God can work through people individually like that, right? Or this larger force can work through people if they so choose to connect themselves to it, right? But that the church wants followers. They don't want people who are individualists.
That's sad, right? Isn't it like missing the fucking point in a way?
Yeah. There's power, though, in the collective.
True.
And a lot of people enjoy that.
That's true.
And just because it's the church and focused on virtues of humanity and doing good and God's will and all that stuff doesn't mean that it's incapable of being corrupted.
Yeah, that's true. I think that's it. Just it feels like a missed opportunity, or and I obviously I bear my own responsibility. I'm a grown man. I could do my own sort of like investigating and feeling, and it feels like in this particular moment, I've had this sort of epiphany, like I'm missing out in a way where I've missed out because I looked at spirituality or religion as sort of one and the same, and not for me. But the reality is it's for me, if I want it to be under on my terms and defined in my way. And maybe God to me is, speaking through you to allow me to appreciate the trees outside, or the blue sky, or the warm day that we're experiencing here.
I suppose the larger question is, how do you expect that communication to come? Right? Do you expect it to be an actual voice? Do you expect it to be, what do you expect it to look like? And how are you attuning yourself to that?
I think, and that's I'm not, and I think that's the key. And I think, yes, I expected it. I think I've been let down by, it goes back to childhood. I think the expectation of safety and warmth and love, it feels like bullshit because I had a shitty childhood. Obviously, people had worse, and I'm okay-ish, working through my shit. But I feel like that set the foundation for me to not, unless someone again knocks on the door, like I'm not seeing it or hearing it, so I'm not believing it, and it causes me to probably miss what is so beautiful about the world.
What if you're also hiding part of yourself? I mean, look, you want to talk about the discomfort of childhood not really existing, right, and not being warm and fuzzy, then the beginning of the Bible is perfect for you, because that comfort and warmth of living in the Garden of Eden doesn't last for very long. True. God gets pissed off pretty quickly, right? And humanity is there hiding from God rather than seeking to be in connection with God, or whatever it is. Right. So I ask this to people of all the time, which is to say, where are you? Right. And that's a very spiritual question, as opposed to why are you? That's a psychological question. But where are you is kind of like, do you want to be seen? Do you want to be connected with other things? is that something you're hoping to gain? Maybe you enjoy being alone. And I know particularly for guys, this is a powerful question because we do enjoy isolating. We'd rather be alone. It's easier not to be in connection with people and feel those feelings. And so to be separate from everyone means that we're capable of doing what we want, experiencing what we want. And so we're used to often being alone in that way. But I would argue that the last thing you want to do while you're going through a major transition, or you have a particularly large question about something, or you're facing a major challenge in your life, is to be alone. You want to be with other people. You want to be with other people who see what your strengths are, can remind you of that, who can also keep an eye on your weaknesses and let you know when those are, showing themselves. And so you can do something about it. You want people who will celebrate with you when you succeed, and who will be there with you when you fail, so that you're not experiencing these things alone, and that you're reminded that you're not crazy either. It's very easy for us to be alone in that way.
Yeah, so that's a great segue, because this is something I think we talked about on your podcast a little bit. Men do isolate, and I have found it incredibly hard to get men to stop that.
Right.
I feel like I'm Sisyphus, right? I'm pushing that fucking boulder up the hill, and it ain't going. I can't get it up there. I haven't stopped trying, but what? How do we? I don't know. The whys are probably fairly easily explained. So maybe we just skip to the how do we stop that? How do we?
The whys are self-explanatory.
Yeah, I think so. Right. How do we end that? Or how do we? What are the best ways to best practices, what the fuck ever, to stop that? How do we get men to stop isolating?
I mean, I keep thinking we have to incentivize in some way, right? Let's just go stereotypical. Let's give them wings and Hooters girls, right? And a pitcher of beer. It may just need to be that type of way to do it. I really, I mean, you and I, we talked about the difficulty in creating men's groups, right?
Yes.
How even over Zoom, it's difficult for them to show up.
Yep.
And really commit to something. And I wonder if the bar needs to be lowered, which is to say that, like, just come in and check in, right?
Yeah.
We're doing this for 20 minutes. That's all it is. It's quick saying hey to people, right? And then we'll expand it from there. I really don't know. There's something we're really averse to about the idea of gathering. It takes, I think, a special breed of guy who's willing to reach out and to do those things.
And I think that's kind of where I'm getting to at it a little bit, where it's like, it's just a matter of patience and finding the right people, because I'm not going to, the guy who doesn't want to come out for whether it be sit down and have a meeting and talk about the shit we're going through, or throw a axe or whack a golf ball. Like, I'm not going to probably convince a man to do that if that's not who he is, unless he's going through a crisis. And so I think this is what I've been thinking more lately. It's just a matter of time and patience. Just keep, John Kim gave me this great advice once, and I was like, how do you
see the angry therapist?
Yeah. I was just fortunate enough. I went through his life coaching school, and he taught a few classes, and he came on the podcast. He's a fucking great guy.
Nice.
And I said, John, how do you deal with like creating, and sometimes like I'll do videos or posts, and like I don't barely get any likes. He's like, you don't do it for that. You do it for the creation. You're a river, and you just keep flowing and keep putting stuff out, and people will dip their toes in here and there. And through that process, then once people do dip their toes and they like what they see, then they're going to come back for more. And they're and if you keep flowing, keep the river going, people are going to come. And that's the way I've sort of started to think about this, because I get very frustrated. I put so much effort into creating local groups for men. And I get guys that say, I want to help. I'm going to be an admin. And then they don't do a fucking thing. And I get so frustrated. I'm like, what? I thought you were like, you came to me and said, I want to help. And here we are, and you're not doing anything. And so I think it's a matter, but there are guys, Scott and Richard, love you guys. They seem to be, yes, they seem to be pretty committed. So I think it's a matter of finding the right guys. And if you just, again, keep being that river and keep letting it flow. And then eventually when they are in that beginning stages and they are vulnerable, then they will reach out and hopefully make connections that will last. But first I gotta build it up. But it's so It can be so frustrating. There are times where I'm like, fuck it. Nobody wants to get together. Fine. Fuck it. It's, let's just all stay isolated and the numbers for suicide are, they're not fucking good, for men, right? I think 3 out of 4 suicides are men. I think the numbers might have dipped a bit, but I can't find good recent numbers because it takes so long to spit the data out. But I think the number is 104 men a day in America are killing themselves,
Jesus.
something like that. Yeah, it's terrible.
Part of the
And
difficulty of male leadership as well is that so much of it, we realize or we think needs to be taken
yes,
on entirely by us.
yes,
Women do
yes,
not lead in the same way. I've noticed
yeah,
being an educator, it's predominantly a female-led organization. I think better for it.
yeah,
But certainly one of the things that I don't get a sense is that like they're leading alone.
yeah.
Um, and men have a tendency of really leading alone. That's a real problem.
Yeah. I mean, I struggle with myself. Like
Right.
I feel like, well, I can get it done. Fuck it, I'll do it myself. And like
Yeah.
that doesn't breed an organization, I don't think. But I'm trying to let go of that desired. It's not, I don't really think it's control. It's just like you're not doing what I know I could do, I'll just do it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like you didn't do it fast enough, or I don't know about standards. I don't just do something, but I get frustrated, and it probably isn't helpful to the cause in some ways, but it's just
What kind of agreements do you have between the people who are helping you out?
nothing for the only thing is like, here's my expectation. There's
Yeah.
3 or 4 things,
Yeah.
and that's all I ask of you. And honestly, largely, so I have a larger Facebook group. I didn't, people get this wrong all the time. I didn't start that Facebook group. It's called Divorce Support for Men. It was started by another guy. He's still
Yeah.
there, but he doesn't do anything. I took it over about 2 years
Yeah.
ago, and I've grown it, and there's 6,600 men in there.
Yeah. I
And
saw that.
then so then I just disseminate. I've created smaller local groups, Facebook groups, and I've recruited as best I can guys to run those. Not a lot. I think there's 58 groups or so, something like that. Southern Maryland, Phoenix, like they're
Wow.
all over the country. But they're, some places like the Tulsa group's got like 10, 12 guys in it. But then there's like the Southern Maryland that has 1 or whatever.
Right.
So the agreement was, if you want to be an admin, I want you to do these 4 things in the smaller group. They're the admin in that smaller group, so they can approve people. So
Yeah.
people request, they approve. That's sort of one of the duties. Welcome them and say, hey, welcome. Find out their availability. When
Yeah.
are you available? Because most people have, at least, guys in our age range are dealing with custody schedules and things of that nature. So,
Yeah.
and then the other part of it is just post in a larger group recruiting and say, hey, we got this local group, because we have guys joining every day.
Right.
Here's our local group. If you're near here, join. And I get guys that will post one time and be like, well, nobody signed up. I'm like, well, you can't do it once. Facebook algorithms, who knows how they fucking work, right?
Right.
And so they get frustrated and they're like, oh, no one's joining. And it's like, okay. And so they stop, which again, gets me super, super frustrated. But again, I tried sometimes to not be frustrated or whatever. And I step back and go, okay, well, but I do have 2 guys
Right.
that are dedicated, and they're doing their best, and they're putting in effort. And I just need to find more of those. And that just comes with time. But what I'm trying to do, I didn't mean to get off on a tangent about what I'm trying to do here, but what I'm trying to do is build sort of the AA for divorced men,
Yeah.
and so that, and so it's
Well, even if
90.
that's the case, I mean, just look at that from a perspective, right? People only really join AA, and I mean, really join AA when they hit rock bottom,
Very true. Very
right?
true.
Like, and very few people, I think, go to it willingly.
That's probably
And
true.
sometimes it requires an intervention as well. So you're talking
Very
about
true.
3 standards there that often
Very
make it
true.
difficult. But I think the major point is that like it needs to be elected to, right? You really need to choose to be there.
True.
And so I guess the question that I have is, and you're not asking for this, but like if I were you, the question
I,
I would have is, how do I make it as ubiquitous, right? If that's the right word,
mm,
right? How do I make it as well known, right,
right.
as AA, right, so that people see it as a natural step?
Yeah, and that's a part of the process too. But I feel like that's one of those things where I actually am trying to step back and not, because I can't. So Scott, shout Scott, he's in Indianapolis or
Right.
in the Indianapolis area.
Right.
I can't recruit in the Indianapolis area. So part of once things got going, I wanted, and I, some of this is again still on me, but I wanted them to also once I have like a brochure, right? I wanted them to go to lawyers and say, hey, here's,
Right.
you know, I want them to
Right.
go to AA groups and say, hey, if
Right.
you got divorced guy, and I want them to go to churches and hand
Right.
these things out and see if, and so yes, it needs to grow in that kind of a way. And I did some looking at like how the heck did AA get to
Get
be
to be
the
what it is.
the
Yeah.
juggernaut and that's what it did. It started
Well,
in I think Kansas City, if I'm not mistaken, and then it went through churches. That's how it sort of
oh yeah, and it helps that alcoholism is a disease, right?
yeah
Like an actual disease that people have to manage, or there's death.
yeah true, very true. Well,
Yeah.
but I think I think there are some similarities. Obviously, I think the consequences, but I don't know, man, because so 104 men a day are killing themselves, I think, in the States, and 38 of those in America every day, 38 are divorced men. And so there's, you could argue in some ways that I think that, I mean, obviously you're not going to divorce yourself to death. Like you can drink yourself to death, right? But there is some serious risk there to being a divorced man because you
Yeah.
don't have the tools to deal with it and suicide and those kinds of things.
Men's
But
health is it needs to be prioritized. There's no question about it. It's a disease. There you go.
yeah, 100%. And so I think there are enough similarities. It's just it's getting ubiquitous, like you said, and I think that I'm trying to start with it online and develop it that way initially, but then you have to go out into the community and recruit that way because not everybody's on Facebook. A whole hell of a lot of people are, but not everybody is.
Right.
Um, and not everyone is going to reach out on something like Facebook for help with something like this. But if they're in a church, they don't even have to reach out in some ways because their pastor, their rabbi, whoever is going to know, and he's going to be able to say, hey, you should check this out. This might help you. So I know that and by the way, nobody steal this idea. I know it's a great idea. It's just
Content copyrighted.
yeah, it's just yeah, that's true. So it's just a matter of it's time. It's also, I mean, also I don't know as I said in my first episode of my podcast, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm making this shit up as I go. And so I'm trying things, and I just know that there is a vacuum, there is a void, and it needs to be filled. So anyway, I didn't
Right.
mean for this to be a rabbit hole about my crusade, but
No, but I think it's all part of it. That like you're going to go through this journey. Why go through it alone?
well,
Right.
yeah, well, 100%, yeah, and I think that does sort of tie back to spirituality. Isn't that sort of a piece of it? Is that you're not alone. You are part of something larger, and I think perhaps people, myself, get hung up on the what of that, who or what or whatever that larger thing is. But I think if you're, and you can answer this, if you're seeking out spirituality or to be more spiritual, to be connected to something larger, and it ties back to AA, right? That this is what they do. Does it matter who or what that larger thing is? Do you think, like, does that, because I think sometimes that inhibits my quest, so to speak, is, well, what larger? What do you mean? Like, who is it?
No, I don't think it matters. I think what matters is that you recognize that you're part of something greater than yourself, right? Humility needs to be a part of it. Humility is what opens us up to realizing that what we think is that we've constructed as truth in our head is really just what we've only informed ourselves about and not necessarily research that we've done external to that. Humility opens us up to other people and experiences, reminding us that we can't do certain things without other people. And so needing to be in a way that we welcome others and the world into our lives is crucial to this whole growth process. And so whether or not you want to believe in God or be connected to a force or whatever it is, being part of the world and not, inherently, I would think, being a spiritual hermit, right? Closing yourself off from everything's. You need to simply be in a position of understanding that you are part of something greater than yourself, right? That in and of itself, I think, is what makes us part of this world and is essential to our survival, because you have to rely on other people. You have to, I don't know anyone that gets by in this world without relying on other people in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah, it's very true. And I think that it, just something you said about, sort of closing yourself off. And for whatever reason, what popped in my head is toxic masculinity. And I know some people lose their fucking minds when you say that phrase. Like, what do you mean?
Yeah.
You mean masculinity is toxic? No, that's not what it means. Shut the fuck up and listen.
Right.
I think when masculinity causes you to not care and thus cut yourself off from the rest of the world, to have no fucks to give about anybody, I think that is toxic, right?
There you go.
And
there you go.
It,
That's the lone wolf mentality stuff.
yeah, and isn't there? Because I was watching a video this morning about masculinity is in crisis, and you got people like Jordan Peterson telling everybody that men can't be men or whatever the fuck he says.
Right.
I think that's complete and total bullshit. I think our definition of masculinity maybe is off, or our expectations of it, or maybe the expectations. How do you see masculinity as someone who's also, you're obviously, you're clearly a man, but you're also, a spiritual, you're an open leader. How do you see masculinity, and is it in crisis, and what are the issues?
Oh, I mean, I don't know how you're ever going to get rid of the entire gender at all.
Yeah.
Right. I don't see the idea of masculinity being in crisis. There are certainly people who, find certain elements of masculinity abhorrent and disgusting. And I think there are certainly plenty of people who see elements of femininity, right, being abhorrent and disgusting. And nobody wants to see those things about the other, but they're kind of here. And so the question is, how much do we encourage them and how much do we allow them? Right. And also, how do we also champion the good stuff? Right. There's a lot of shunning and shaming of the bad, the toxic stuff. And again, like, masculinity in and of itself is not toxic. I appreciate that you said that. Right. There are habits, right, that many men have a tendency of practicing at one point or another in their lives that are disgusting, that are toxic. Right. And so that's how the idea of masculinity, comes into play. And I think also the idea of inherited patriarchy, right? The privileges that we've been able to enjoy in our lives, and the boxes that we put ourselves in are kind of all a result of that. And so it's masculinity is made up not only of, what you're born into, your gender identity, right? Your DNA, your genetics, but also, right, the culture that you grow up in. Right. And to an extent, how much you wish to also transcend that and realize that, okay, you may have, from a biological standpoint, a certain form and figure, but you are more than that at, your core from a spiritual perspective. And so in some ways, your masculinity can be solely defined by your body. And in other ways, it doesn't have to be at all.
Yeah. When you talk about patriarchy and sort of the boxes that I always sort of, I feel like people, and me included, I think, sort of gloss over that. Just because it's true, it's ubiquitous. It's like, yes, of course, but I also think there are some folks that don't quite understand. Well, what do you mean? And I promise that I'm asking, so I don't understand. But I really think it's important to really sort of hone in on some things. And so we put ourselves in these boxes, and we talk about the patriarchy because that's long ago, right? When there were kings and feudal systems, and right, and like men did certain things, and that was what they were expected and allowed, and whatever. And so we're talking about hundreds of years of this is the way it's going to be, and maybe in some ways, or correct me if I'm wrong, maybe in some ways that allowed us to get to this point, but isn't that what we're talking about? Sort of when we talk about the patriarchy, we're talking about long ago, in the medieval times, right? We
That's
were
certainly
told
the idea that I think people,
we were told this is where men will do this, and that's just the way it's going to be. Isn't that kind of what we're talking about? We're talking about years and centuries, right, of
And way
norms.
before that, I mean, I think what we're just talking about is really just kind of generally accepted male behavior that went unchecked, and in many
Mm,
ways also encouraged and celebrated by people for any number of reasons. I think we all have contributed, both genders have contributed to patriarchy in one way or another because we've benefited from it as a result of needing to benefit from it, right? Not that we had the free range of choice. Not everyone had the free range of choice of benefiting from it, but um, and choosing other things as well. But many other people just kind of had to choose it and needed to choose it because of the benefit it gave them, like women, right?
yeah,
It benefited women to put men in charge of any number of different things because men had greater earning power than they did. And
yeah.
so to attach themselves to that, right, may have been supporting the patriarchy in some way, but they did it because they needed to,
Mm,
right? And how could you really blame them for that?
you couldn't.
And yet at the same time, right, there might be a lot of other things that were completely unnecessary, right? Seeing men as being invulnerable,
Mm,
right? Men will often say, the men I work with, that women don't want to see them weak,
right,
right? And yet vulnerability is incredibly sexy right now, right? So
right,
everyone wants to see vulnerability.
right,
But for a long time, right, men got the message from women that they didn't want to be seen as vulnerable,
right.
right? And so, um, like women have demanded not seeing men as vulnerable because they've benefited from it, because they enjoy having a strong man around who will protect them,
Yeah,
right? And whether that was real or imagined, the need for it, right? They bought into, then perpetuated that toxicity,
yeah.
right? The inability really to find yourself and see yourself as weak and to break down in that way and to be vulnerable, right? You might be upset that men don't do it now, but what about taking responsibility for it in the past?
Mm. Yeah, so I mean, I suppose that strength and that invulnerability was pretty fucking handy when, and I always think, when I think about these like medieval times, I think about fucking castles and knights and shit, right? Like those
All
guys
Game of
couldn't,
Thrones.
yeah,
All
that
Game
stuff,
of Thrones.
right? Like they can't, they couldn't be, they had to fucking people to fight and to kill and to, that was
Right.
true protection, true, like
Right.
that they couldn't be weak and vulnerable, but fucking hey guys, there's no castles being
Right.
needed to be defended anymore,
Right.
right? But I think it's interesting that you say um women bought into it. I mean, because they had to, right? And I wonder if there's some shame perhaps, or some pushback because of that, like generational shit obviously, but like women did that because they had to, and now it maybe that's, they don't need to, and so maybe there is some sort of pushback because of that. I don't know, I'm kind of getting lost in my own thoughts here, but there certainly seems to be a feminism wave in the last, I don't know how many years, 10, 15, 20 maybe, where it's like they don't need anyone or anything, right? They're strong and independent, but
I think feminism has always been a lot about independence, and reclaiming oneself and also living one's own life, on one's own terms, supported by one's own self and one's own creativity in that way. As far as I know, that's kind of some of the roots of feminism in that way, and not needing to rely on anyone else in order to lead that individual life, and doing so proudly. And yeah, I think that butts up against maybe traditional modes of masculinity and traditional ways that women could have related to men, which is to rely on them entirely in certain ways. Again, sometimes out of real necessity,
sure.
right? Sometimes out of desire simply to do so and be supported in that way, and many times out of real necessity.
Yeah. So when these men come to you and they say, you know, I can't be vulnerable. What do you say to them?
Yeah,
How do you coach them through that?
we practice it.
Yeah.
We practice it. It's a matter of really kind of taking it step by step and, asking one question at a time, and, you know, explaining what vulnerability is, right? So that they understand that there's a whole spectrum between sharing a little versus sharing a lot, and what that really looks like, and how people respond to those things, and what are good things to share and things that you want to hold on to, maybe, and really trust people with.
Mm.
But then also sharing bit by bit and realizing that they're not going to get shamed for it, that they're going to get praised for it and even loved for it. Um, is a real, it's a tool, it's a necessary tool in getting them to be able to share with other people.
Yeah. Is there a part of this too where if you find the right woman, she will be interested in your vulnerabilities, right? Like you said, it's sort of a sexier thing now.
Well, I
And
think, yeah, you find any person in your life who's willing to allow you to be vulnerable with them on your terms, and then also celebrates you for it, and loves you as a result, as a person you want to keep around in your life. No question about it. Yeah.
yeah, then that can
Yeah.
be, I think, where doing the work comes in, so you can identify
Sure.
those people that are willing or able, or because I think it's able more than anything. So I think people that can't deal with your vulnerability are because they can't be vulnerable, because it's a threat to them in some
Yeah.
ways. Like, well, I can't do that, so I don't want you to do that. And I think those aren't the kind of people that you want to surround yourself with.
Right.
Yeah. So first of all, thanks for doing this. I mean, this
Of
is
course.
someone like yourself is very fascinating to me, because you have this sort of life that I don't experience as a spiritual person. I don't have that. So getting your perspective is really, really it's a treat to me. And I don't mean that to sound like flippant, because it's not. I appreciate your approach to life and your honesty and sharing it with me, because I promise you, when I leave here, I'm going to look at the world a little bit differently. So
I
um,
appreciate that.
yeah, thank you so much for doing it. So as you know, the last question I ask everyone is, what words of wisdom would you impart to a man who just started his divorce journey?
I would say continue to reach out. I mean, going along with our theme, right? The idea of finding yourself in connection with other people is crucial. The men's group that I was part of while I was going through my divorce was crucial. I've said this any number of times, and just in terms of being a vessel by which I could put different things in, particularly fears and anxieties, and anger was really helpful for me in going through divorce in healthy ways. So I would suggest to any men going through it, continue to reach out to anyone who's really willing to listen lovingly and to also help you out. So your lawyer, your therapist, your divorce coach, find a men's group, find a clergy person of some kind, find a really good friend who's going to listen to you, bitch and moan,
Yeah.
in really safe ways. You got to find those points of connection. So reach out.
Yeah. Excellent words of wisdom. I couldn't agree more. How can people find you? I know the Human
Sure.
Podcast, but what's the
Yeah.
best way to reach you?
You can find me at Noam Raucher, NoamRaucher at gmail.com, noamrauscher.com, my website. And you can also find me on social media at that name, Noam Raucher, on Instagram and on Facebook. I'd love to get to know you a little bit better. And my podcast, The Jewish Divorce Project, the Human Podcast, HUEMAN podcast. Come find me, friends. Let's chat.
Awesome. Thanks, Noam. I really appreciate it. Thanks for doing
Thanks,
this.
sir.
Yep. Take care.
Much appreciated.
Thank you so much for watching and or listening. Since my separation in July of 2019, I have done an incredible amount of work on myself. I've had many different therapists, life coaches, and went through different programs. I've taken all that I've learned and put it into my own program called Forged by Fire. If you are interested in having me help you navigate your divorce, please hit my website, risingphoenixdivorcecoach.com. I look forward to working with you.